A human janitor witnessed the forbidden, the abduction of an alien princess on a space station where humans barely rank above vermin. Stephen Rogers crouched in a grimy service duct, pulse pounding, as the muffled screams of Princess Mira cut through the glittering ambassadorial wing of Zephyria Station like a plasma torch. Peering through the vent slats, Rogers watched in disbelief as masked assailants dragged the unconscious Norcadian princess onto a waiting ship, swiftly overwhelming her guard detail. The attackers moved with ruthless precision, their motives inscrutable. In mere moments, an unthinkable act of aggression against the galaxy's preeminent power had transpired under Rogers's stunned gaze. Rogers knew he should alert security. Protocol demanded it. But a lifetime laboring under the callous rule of Earth's Norcadian protectors bred a deep distrust of authority. Icy realization crystallized in Rogers' gut. Mira's abduction could shatter the fragile détente between the Norcadian Empire and Earth. If blame fell on humanity, it would mean certain war, a war Earth couldn't possibly win. This was bigger than a kidnapping. It was an existential threat. As alarms blared and security mobilized, Rogers faced a split-second choice. No one else on this station, Norcadian or human, would dare get involved. The political implications were too incendiary. Despite his humble station, despite the impossible odds, Rogers made his decision. He would rescue the princess himself before her captors escaped, or die trying. For if he stood by and did nothing, Earth would surely burn. Rogers slipped into the twisting service tunnels, the cold metal walls a reflection of the galaxy's indifference. Princess Mira's trail grew fainter with each passing moment. But where training and common sense urged caution, human audacity burned brighter. One man's resolve, forged in the crucible of an occupied Earth, would now shape the course of civilizations. The janitor no one noticed would become the hero no one expected, or Earth's final hope would be forever extinguished. Rogers crept through the maintenance corridors, his heart pounding as he neared the hangar bay. Peering around a corner, he caught sight of Princess Mira being carried up the ramp of a sleek black ship. The hatch began to close with a hydraulic hiss. One of the kidnappers, a hulking brute with a jagged scar across his face, barked orders. "Get her secured. We need to reach the rendezvous point in Sector 9 before the Norcadians realize she's missing." Rogers's mind raced. He stood no chance against the armed assailants alone. Mira would be lost if that ship broke atmosphere. In a split-second decision, he rushed to a maintenance panel and pulled the manual release for the hangar doors. Alarms wailed as the massive pressure-locked gates ground to a halt. The scarred kidnapper whirled around. "Find out what's wrong with those damn doors!" Rogers ducked into a side passage as booted feet pounded past. He needed help, and fast. Racking his brain, he thought of Zalcor, a cephaloid technician who worked the gamma shift. The tentacled alien was the closest thing Rogers had to a friend on this station. More importantly, Zalcor had access to the armory. Sprinting down little-used corridors, Rogers burst into the technician's ready room. Zalcor's bulbous eyes widened in surprise. "Stephen, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Rogers panted. "The Norcadian princess has been kidnapped. I saw it happen." Zalcor's chromatophores flashed in alarm. "Mira, abducted? That's an act of war." Rogers nodded grimly. "And we're the only ones who can stop it. I need your help, Zal. No one else will risk getting involved." The cephaloid's tentacles writhed in indecision for a long moment. Then his features hardened with commitment. "What do you need me to do?" As Rogers quickly outlined a desperate plan, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to drag his friend into a conflict that could consume them all. But with a captive princess and the prospect of galactic war hanging in the balance, there was no choice. They had to act regardless of the cost. Time was running out. The hangar doors wouldn't hold the kidnappers forever. This unlikely duo, a human janitor and an alien technician, were the last fragile line of defense between peace and oblivion. Zalcor's voice snapped Rogers back to the present. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go save a princess." Rogers allowed himself the ghost of a smile as they set off at a run. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. Rogers's boots pounded against the deck as he raced through the twisting service tunnels, Zalcor close on his heels. The cephaloid's tentacles flew over a handheld console, his face a mask of concentration. "I'm in," Zalcor chirped. "Hangar bay doors sealed. They're not going anywhere." Rogers nodded grimly. "Good. Keep an eye on those security feeds. I'm going in." Zalcor's chromatophores flashed with concern. "Be careful, Stephen. Those guys look like real pros." Rogers flashed a tight smile. "So was I once upon a time." He slipped into the hangar, darting from shadow to shadow until he reached the sleek black ship. The hatch stood open, inviting. Rogers crept up the ramp, senses straining for any sign of the kidnappers. The cargo hold was dimly lit, crates of illicit goods stacked haphazardly. There in the center was Princess Mira. She lay bound and unconscious, her iridescent skin glowing softly in the gloom. Rogers rushed to her side, fingers fumbling with the restraints. Suddenly, a meaty hand clamped down on his shoulder, wrenching him backwards. Rogers found himself staring up into the scarred, leering face of the brutish kidnapper. "Well, well," Scar growled. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero." Rogers lashed out, his fist connecting with Scar's jaw. The alien barely flinched. Scar's answering blow sent Rogers crashing into a stack of crates, pain exploding through his ribs. They traded furious punches in the cramped hold, grappling and slamming each other against the bulkheads. Despite his orbital assault training, Rogers was badly outmatched. Scar's raw strength and tough hide shrugged off hits that would have felled a human. Scar's hands closed around Rogers' throat, choking off his air. Black spots swam in his vision. This was it. He had failed. Suddenly, a blaster bolt sizzled over Rogers' shoulder, catching Scar square in the chest. The alien convulsed and crumpled. Rogers turned to see Mira, battered but unbowed, clutching a fallen blaster. "We have to go," she said urgently. They raced to the cockpit, only to pull up short. The pilot slumped over the controls, a blackened hole in his head. Mira cursed softly. "Scar wasn't much for loyalty," Rogers muttered. Sliding into the pilot's seat, Rogers' hands flew over the unfamiliar controls. The ship thrummed to life. He overrode the hangar doors and hit the thrusters, blasting them out into the starry void. Alarms blared. Zephyrian fighters dropped into formation behind them, weapons hot. Rogers juked and jinked, pushing the ship to its limits. But he knew they couldn't outrun them. Not for long. An insane idea crystallized in his mind. A micro-jump within Zephiria's gravity well. It had never been done. The risks were astronomical. But what choice did they have? He turned to Mira, saw his own desperate perseverance mirrored in her eyes. "Do you trust me?" She held his gaze for a long moment. "Yes, do it." Mira strapped in as Rogers wrenched the ship into alignment. Hull integrity alarms screamed. The enemy formation closed. Rogers' hand hovered over the FTL controls. Mira reached out, gripping his arm. A connection, a lifeline. Rogers punched it. The stars stretched into searing lines of light. And they were gone, hurled into the uncharted dark between worlds, bound together now not by duty, but by the desperate choices that had just made them fugitives and reluctant partners. Their daring escape had birthed an unlikely alliance and lit the spark of something far greater, though they could not yet see it. The galaxy would never be the same. The stars snapped back into focus as the stolen ship dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning from the strain of the impossible jump. Rogers slumped in the pilot's seat, his vision swimming. Mira's grip on his arm loosened as she peered out the viewport. "We made it," she breathed, her voice tinged with disbelief. Rogers managed a weak nod, fighting to stay conscious. "Not out of the woods yet, Princess. That jump drained our fuel cells. We're running on fumes." A proximity alarm blared, startling them both. Rogers' eyes widened as he took in the rapidly approaching blue-green orb dominating their view. "Earth," he whispered, "of all the places." Mira's brow furrowed. "Your homeworld? But that's impossible. We couldn't have—" Her words were cut short as the ship shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across the console as they plunged into Earth's atmosphere. Rogers wrestled with the controls, trying to stabilize their descent. "Brace yourself," he shouted as the ground rushed up to meet them. The impact was deafening. Metal shrieked and tore as the ship carved a burning path through snow and rock. Rogers felt himself thrown forward, his body slamming against the restraints. Then darkness claimed him. When consciousness returned, it brought with it a symphony of pain. Rogers blinked, his vision blurry. Acrid smoke filled his lungs, making him cough. A crimson droplet splattered on the cracked console before him. Gritting his teeth, Rogers assessed his situation. A support beam pinned his legs, trapping him in the ruined cockpit. With a grunt of effort, he pushed against the beam. It didn't budge. "Mira," he called out, his voice hoarse. No response. Panic gave him strength. Rogers strained against the beam, muscles screaming in protest. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to shift. With a final heave, he freed himself and stumbled to his feet. The ship's hull had split open, letting in the biting mountain air. Rogers limped outside, squinting against the glare of sunlight on snow. There, a few meters away, lay a crumpled form. "Mira!" Rogers rushed to her side, his own injuries forgotten. The Norcadian princess was unconscious but breathing. Her iridescent skin was marred by cuts and bruises, but she was alive. Rogers sagged with relief, then tensed as he surveyed their surroundings. Jagged peaks stretched in every direction, an endless sea of white broken only by the smoking wreckage of their ship. They had survived the crash, but at what cost? He turned back to Mira, gently shaking her shoulder. "Princess, wake up. We need to move." Mira's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. She sat up gingerly, wincing. Where are we?" "Earth," Rogers replied grimly. "Welcome to my world, Your Highness." Mira's gaze swept across the desolate landscape, her expression hardening. "This is a mistake. We need to leave immediately. My people will be searching for me." Rogers shook his head. "Our ship is toast. Even if it wasn't, we don't have the fuel to break atmosphere. We're stuck here until help arrives." "Then we wait," Mira said firmly. "The Norcadian fleet will find us soon enough." Rogers bit back a retort. He knew the odds of a rescue were slim to none, but arguing wouldn't help their situation. Instead, he focused on immediate concerns. "We need shelter," he said. "The temperature's dropping fast. I'll see what I can salvage from the ship." As Rogers picked through the wreckage, gathering what meager supplies had survived, he couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. They were stranded in one of the most inhospitable regions on Earth, with no way to call for help. And his unlikely companion, rather than an asset, might prove to be his greatest liability. Mira watched him work, her royal poise at odds with their dire circumstances. Rogers met her gaze, seeing not an ally, but a pampered aristocrat wholly unprepared for the brutal reality of survival on Earth. He sighed, shouldering a makeshift pack of scavenged gear. This was going to be a long, hard road, and it was clear the princess had no idea just how far they'd have to go to make it out alive. Days blurred into weeks as Rogers and Mira fought to survive in the unforgiving mountain wilderness. Their tenuous alliance, born of necessity, was tested by the harsh realities of Earth's environment. Mira's royal upbringing left her ill-equipped for the grueling physical demands, while Rogers struggled to temper his growing frustration with her inexperience. One bitterly cold night, as they huddled in a makeshift shelter, the distant whine of engines cut through the howling wind. Rogers tensed, hand instinctively reaching for the blaster, salvaged from the crash. Mira's eyes widened in alarm. "Norcadian ships?" she whispered. Rogers shook his head. "No, those are human aircraft." Before they could react, figures emerged from the swirling snow, weapons raised. Rogers pushed Mira behind him, raising his hands slowly. "We're unarmed," he called out. "We need help." A gruff voice answered, "Identify yourselves." "Stephen Rogers, former orbital assault. This is—" He hesitated, weighing his options. "This is Mira. I rescued her from alien captivity." Tense moments passed before the leader stepped forward, lowering his rifle. "I'm Kovac. Welcome to the Resistance, Rogers." The rebel base was a sprawling network of caverns, bustling with activity. As medics tended to their injuries, Kovacs questioned them relentlessly. Rogers carefully omitted certain details of Mira's true identity, but the rebel leader's suspicion was palpable. An alien with strategic knowledge of Norcadian military operations? Kovacs mused. That's quite the prize you've stumbled upon, Rogers. Mira bristled at being referred to as a prize, but Rogers squeezed her arm in warning. They couldn't afford to alienate their only allies. Days passed and the uneasy truce held. Rogers found himself drawn into the Resistance's operations, his combat experience proving invaluable. Mira, initially shunned by the human rebels, slowly gained their respect through her sharp tactical insights. One night, as Rogers stood watch on the cavern's upper ridge, Mira joined him. Her iridescent skin seemed to glow in the moonlight. "These humans," she said softly, "they fight with such passion, such tenacity. I never understood." A distant explosion cut her off. Alarms blared throughout the base. Rogers grabbed his rifle, heart pounding. "We're under attack!" Chaos erupted as Krath's forces swarmed the rebel stronghold. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, cutting down defenders. Rogers found himself in the thick of the fighting, years of training kicking in as he barked orders and returned fire. To his surprise, Mira was at his side, wielding a captured alien weapon with unexpected proficiency. Her cool head and strategic mind proved instrumental in coordinating the rebels' defense. As the dust settled and the first wave of attackers retreated, Rogers caught Mira's eye. Something unspoken passed between them, a newfound respect, a deepening bond forged in the heat of battle. But their reprieve was short-lived. Kovacs's grim face said it all as he approached. "This was just the beginning," the rebel leader growled. "Krath won't stop until he has what he came for." His eyes settled on Mira. Rogers tensed, ready to defend her, but Mira stepped forward. "I have a plan," she said, her voice steady. "Use me as bait." "Absolutely not," Rogers snapped. But as Mira outlined her strategy, even Rogers had to admit it was their best chance. With heavy hearts, they prepared for the daring plan ahead. As dawn broke, Mira stood alone on an exposed ridge, her royal garments shimmering in the early light. Rogers watched from concealment, every fiber of his being screaming to protect her. The distinctive whine of Krath's ship filled the air. Rogers' grip tightened on his weapon. This was it, their last stand. The distinctive whine of Krath's ship filled the air as Mira stood exposed on the ridge. Rogers tensed, ready to spring into action. But before the alien hunter could strike, a sudden sandstorm engulfed them, obscuring visibility and forcing Krath to retreat. In the chaos, Rogers grabbed Mira's hand. "This way!" he shouted over the howling wind. They stumbled through the blinding grit, gasping for breath. Hours later, the storm abated. Rogers and Mira found themselves in a twisting maze of red rock canyons. Exhausted and dehydrated, they slumped against a weathered cliff face. "We can't keep running forever," Mira said, her voice hoarse. Before Rogers could respond, a voice called out from above. "You two look like you could use some help." They looked up to see a weathered face peering down from a hidden ledge. The man introduced himself as Jalen, leader of a nearby human settlement. Initial wariness gave way to cautious acceptance as Rogers explained their situation, careful to conceal Mira's true identity. Jalen led them to his people's hidden sanctuary, a network of caves and terraced gardens carved into the canyon walls. "It's not much," Jalen said, "but it's home." As they recovered, Rogers and Mira marveled at the colonists' ingenuity. Solar stills captured precious water from the arid air. Hydroponic gardens flourished in repurposed alien storage pods. Children played with toys cobbled together from scavenged tech. Mira found herself drawn to their workshop, where settlers jury-rigged solutions to daily survival challenges. She shared her knowledge of Norcadian science, helping them refine their recycling systems and boost crop yields. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls, Mira turned to Rogers. "I never understood before," she said softly, "the strength of your people, to not just survive, but to find joy in such hardship." Rogers smiled. "That's what makes us human." Their moment was shattered by the crack of gunfire. Human mercenaries swarmed into the canyon, hunting for the alien princess. Rogers sprang into action, organizing the colonists' defense. Mira fought at his side, her royal training put to unexpected use. They drove the attackers back, but at a cost. As they tended to the wounded, Jalen delivered grim news. "They'll be back, and in greater numbers. We've put you at risk by sheltering you." Rogers and Mira exchanged a look. They knew what they had to do. But before they could slip away, a familiar whine filled the air. Krath had returned, and this time he brought an army. Assault mechs stomped through the canyon as alien warriors rappelled down the cliffs. "We have to leave," Rogers urged the colonists. "We brought this on you." Jalen shook his head. "This is our home. We'll defend it." With no time to argue, Rogers and Mira threw themselves into the preparations. They turned the colonists' scrapyard into an arsenal, jury-rigging traps and weapons from salvaged tech. As Krath's forces closed in, Rogers found Mira calibrating a makeshift energy cannon. Her eyes blazed with persistence. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's show them what humans and Norcadians can do together." The battle erupted in a storm of plasma fire and improvised explosives. Rogers and Mira fought side by side, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. For a moment, it seemed their crazy plan might work. Then Krath himself strode onto the battlefield, his massive form dwarfing his troops. He locked eyes with Mira, a cruel smile twisting his features. "At last," he growled, raising his weapon. "The hunt ends here." "At last," Krath growled, raising his weapon. "The hunt ends." The alien hunter's massive form loomed over the battlefield, dwarfing his troops. Rogers's heart pounded as he watched Krath stride forward, his cruel smile fixed on Mira. "Fall back!" Rogers shouted to the nearby colonists, desperation edging his voice. He turned to Mira, ready to grab her and run, but she stood her ground, eyes blazing with commitment. Krath's troops surged forward, overwhelming the makeshift defenses. Rogers frantically scanned their surroundings, spotting a salvaged rocket launcher in the debris. He dove for it, rolling to his feet and taking aim at the approaching hunter. The rocket streaked towards Krath, exploding in a brilliant flash. But as the smoke cleared, Rogers' heart sank. The alien stood unscathed, protected by a shimmering energy field. "Pitiful," Krath sneered, advancing on Rogers. Mira's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Krath, I surrender myself to you. Call off your attack." Rogers spun to face her, disbelief etched on his features. "Mira, no!" But the princess stood tall, her chin raised in defiance. Krath paused, considering her offer. "A wise decision, Your Highness," the hunter purred. He raised a clawed hand and his troops ceased fire. Rogers tried to reach Mira, but colonists held him back. "We have to go," Jalen urged, pulling at his arm. As Krath's soldiers surrounded Mira, she locked eyes with Rogers one last time. In that moment, he saw not defeat, but a fierce, unspoken promise. Whatever happened, their fight would continue. Helpless, Rogers watched as Mira was led away. The surviving colonists dragged him from the battlefield, retreating deeper into the twisting canyons. Hours later, in a hastily established camp, Rogers paced restlessly. The weight of failure pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. But Mira's final look burned in his memory, spurring him to action. He gathered the weary survivors, their faces etched with loss and uncertainty. Rogers took a deep breath, pushing aside his own doubts. "We've lost today," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word. "But we're not beaten. Mira sacrificed herself to give us a chance, and we can't waste it. We'll rebuild, we'll grow stronger, and we'll find a way to strike back." As Rogers spoke, he saw a flicker of hope ignite in the colonists' eyes. They had lost their home, but not their will to fight. Miles away, Mira stood in a sterile cell aboard Krath's ship. The hunter observed her through a force field, his expression unreadable. "I expected groveling," Krath said, breaking the silence, "or perhaps futile threats. But you stand there like a true warrior." Mira met his gaze unflinchingly. "I am more than you could ever understand, Krath." The hunter chuckled, a harsh grating sound. Perhaps. My employer will be pleased, regardless. They have plans for you. As Krath turned to leave, Mira allowed herself a small smile. Let them think they had won. She had seen the strength of the human spirit, had felt it awaken something within herself. Whatever trials lay ahead, she would face them with the same tenacity she had witnessed in Rogers and the colonists. In the quiet of her cell, Mira closed her eyes, picturing Rogers's face. She silently vowed that this was not the end, but a new beginning. The seeds of change had been planted, and not even the vast emptiness of space could stop them from taking root. The dawn broke over the makeshift rebel camp, casting long shadows across the faces of the weary survivors. Rogers stood at the edge of their hidden canyon, his eyes scanning the horizon. The weight of Mira's capture pressed down on him, but he refused to let it crush his spirit. "We move out in 10, he called over his shoulder, his voice carrying a steel edge. As the small band of rebels prepared for their journey, Rogers' mind raced. He had heard whispers, fragments of information pass through the underground network of human resistance. A name kept surfacing: Dr. Hagen Vance. Their trek through the unforgiving desert was grueling. Sand whipped at their faces, driven by hot winds that seemed to sap the moisture from their very cells. Rogers pushed the group relentlessly, always alert for the telltale whine of militia patrols. On the third day, as they crested a dune, Rogers spotted a glint of metal in the distance. He raised a fist, signaling the others to halt. "There," he murmured, passing his binoculars to Jalen. "That has to be it." The abandoned research bunker sat half buried in the sand, its entrance barely visible. As they approached, Rogers felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. They were being watched. A voice crackled over a hidden speaker. "Turn back now, or face the consequences." Rogers stepped forward, hands raised. "Dr. Vance, we're not here to harm you. We need your help." Silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, a section of the sand shifted, revealing a reinforced door. Inside, the air was cool and stale. Dr. Vance emerged from the shadows, a gaunt figure with wild eyes darting between the newcomers. "You're with them, aren't you?" Vance accused, his fingers twitching towards a jury-rigged weapon. "Come to silence me for good?" Rogers shook his head. "We're fighting against them, Doctor, and we need your expertise to save someone very important." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "A Norcadian princess named Mira." The change in Vance was immediate. His posture softened, a flicker of hope crossing his features. "You've made contact? Peaceful contact?" As Rogers recounted their story, Vance's excitement grew. The scientist led them deeper into the bunker, revealing a hidden lab filled with cobbled-together equipment. "My life's work," Vance explained, gesturing to a complex array of monitors. "A cipher to decode alien communication frequencies. But they called me a traitor when I suggested diplomacy." Rogers leaned in, studying the flickering screens. "Can you use this to find Krath's outpost?" Vance hesitated, then nodded. "It will take time to reconstruct, but yes, I believe so." As Vance worked feverishly to recreate his cipher, Rogers organized the rebels. They dispatched small teams to gather intel, always staying one step ahead of the roving militia. Days blurred into weeks. Rogers found himself poring over star charts with Vance, decoding fragments of alien transmissions. Each small breakthrough brought them closer to Mira's location. Finally, Vance let out a triumphant shout. "I've got it! The coordinates of Krath's outpost!" Rogers studied the readout, his eyebrows furrowed. They had a target. Now came the hard part, planning a rescue mission that seemed impossible. As he outlined his daring strategy to the rebels, Rogers couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Unknown to him, a shadowy figure observed their preparations through advanced surveillance tech. The figure's gloved hand tapped out an encrypted message. "Target located. Rogers' rebellion gaining strength, awaiting orders to neutralize threat." Miles away in the sterile confines of Krath's prison, Mira endured another round of grueling interrogation. The alien hunter loomed over her, frustration evident in his snarling features. "Where is the human?" Krath demanded. "What are they planning?" Mira met his gaze, her voice steady. I told you, I don't know. As Krath stormed from the cell, Mira allowed herself a small smile. She had faith in Rogers. Whatever he was planning, she would be ready. Ready. Whatever he was planning, she would be there to see it through. Rogers crouched behind a sand-blasted rock formation, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill of the desert night. He peered through night vision binoculars at Krath's outpost, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. The fortress's energy barriers pulsed with an eerie blue glow, a stark reminder of the alien technology they were up against. Defenses look tight, he murmured to Jalen, who lay prone beside him. But there's a weak spot in the southwest quadrant. If we can... A high-pitched whine cut through the air. Rogers's blood ran cold as he recognized the sound of energy weapons powering up. Ambush! He bellowed, diving for cover as the night erupted in a storm of plasma fire. Chaos engulfed their position. Rogers' rebels scrambled for what little shelter the barren landscape offered, returning fire with their cobbled-together weapons. But they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Through the smoke and dust, Rogers caught glimpses of their attackers, sleek figures in advanced combat armor, wielding alien weaponry with practiced ease. His gut twisted as he recognized the unmistakable tactics of Earth's elite security forces. A familiar voice boomed across the battlefield. Stand down, Rogers. You're only making this harder on yourself. Rogers' eyes widened in disbelief. Jenner? Kyle Jenner, his former commanding officer, stood atop an armored vehicle, plasma rifle held casually at his side. That's right, old friend. Now be smart and surrender. There's no way out of this one. Rogers' mind raced. How had Jenner found them? How long had he been watching? He shook off the questions, focusing on the dire situation at hand. Fall back, Rogers shouted to his team. Get to the bunker. They retreated under heavy fire, half dragging the wounded. Rogers' heart sank as he saw Dr. Vance stumble, clutching his side where a plasma bolt had struck home. Inside the bunker, alarms blared as Jenner's forces breached the outer defenses. Rogers helped Vance to his makeshift lab, where the scientist slumped against a console. The cipher, Vance gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. You have to take it. Don't let them destroy our work. Rogers gripped the dying man's shoulder. I won't. I swear it. Vance's eyes locked onto Rogers's, burning with intensity. Promise me, you'll bring them together. Humans and aliens, as equals. It's the only way. I promise, Rogers said, his voice thick with emotion. As Vance's life slipped away, Rogers downloaded the cipher data onto a portable drive. He rejoined his team in the main chamber, where they held off Jenner's assault with dwindling ammunition. We can't stay here, Jalen shouted over the din of battle. They'll overrun us any minute. Rogers nodded grimly. I've got a plan, but you're not going to like it. Minutes later, they burst from the bunker in a makeshift transport cobbled together from scavenged parts. Rogers gunned the engine, plowing through Jenner's lines as his comrades laid down suppressing fire. After them! Jenner's voice crackled over the comm channels. Don't let Rogers escape! The chase stretched across the merciless desert. Rogers pushed their ramshackle vehicle to its limits, weaving between rock formations and diving into treacherous ravines. One by one, Jenner's pursuit vehicles fell behind or crashed. As dawn broke, Rogers finally allowed himself to breathe. They had escaped, but at a terrible cost. Half their team was dead or captured. Their base of operations was lost. And Mira. Rogers activated the cipher, his hands shaking with exhaustion. A holographic display flickered to life, revealing the location of Krath's fortress. It was further than he'd feared, in the heart of alien-controlled territory. We can't do this alone, Jalen said, reading the defeat in Rogers' posture. Rogers nodded slowly. You're right. We need help. He squared his shoulders, a new willpower settling over him. And I think I know where to find it. Days later, their battered group stumbled upon a hidden valley. As they approached what appeared to be a sheer cliff face, armed figures materialized from cloaked positions. That's far enough, a stern voice called out. A woman stepped forward, her face weathered by hardship and her eyes sharp with suspicion. I am Naya. State your business here, strangers. Rogers met her gaze unflinchingly. My name is Rogers. I've come seeking allies in the fight against our alien oppressors. Naya's expression hardened. We've heard whispers of your exploits, Rogers. But words mean little here. What do you bring to our cause besides pretty speeches about coexistence? Rogers held up the data drive containing Vance's cipher. The key to striking at the heart of Krath's operations, and a chance to rescue someone who could change everything. Naya considered him for a long moment, then gestured for them to follow. Come, we have much to discuss. As they entered the hidden rebel stronghold, Rogers felt a glimmer of hope. But he knew the hardest battles, both against their enemies and for the very soul of the resistance, still lay ahead. Rogers followed Naya through winding tunnels carved into the cliff face, his team close behind. The rebel stronghold buzzed with activity, fighters maintaining weapons, medics tending to the wounded, and technicians huddled over makeshift communications arrays. Naya led them to a dimly lit war room, where a holographic display flickered to life. Show me what you've got, she demanded. Rogers inserted the data drive, and Vance's cipher sprang to life. A 3D map of Krath's fortress materialized, revealing intricate details of its defenses and vulnerabilities. Naya's eyes gleamed. With this, we could finally strike a decisive blow. Exactly, Rogers said. But we need to prioritize rescuing Mira. She's the key to... No, Naya cut him off. This isn't about your alien princess. It's about liberating humanity. Rogers felt the air leave his lungs. What are you saying? Naya's face hardened. You want our help? Fine. But we do this our way. No rescues, no alien diplomacy. We use this intel to crush Krath and ignite a full-scale human uprising. That's not what we agreed. It's my way or nothing, Rogers. Choose. Rogers' mind raced. Every instinct screamed to save Mira, to pursue the dream of cooperation they'd fought for. But without allies, without resources, what chance did they have? He closed his eyes, Mira's face etched in his memory. I'm sorry, he whispered. Rogers looked up at Naya, his face hardened. We do it your way. The assault began under cover of darkness. Naya's guerrillas launched a thunderous barrage against Krath's fortress, energy weapons illuminating the night sky. As alarms blared and Krath's forces scrambled to respond, Rogers led his strike team to a concealed access point. Jalen, prep the charges, Rogers ordered, his voice low. The rest of you, watch our 6. The service tunnel hatch exploded inward. Rogers' team surged forward, encountering immediate resistance. Plasma bolts sizzled past as they dove for cover. Push through, Rogers shouted, returning fire. The close quarters amplified the deafening cacophony of battle. They fought their way deeper into the fortress, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Rogers' heart pounded as they neared the detention level. Despite Naya's ultimatum, he couldn't abandon hope. The cell block entrance loomed ahead. Rogers planted a breaching charge, counting down. 3, 2, 1. The door disintegrated. Rogers burst in, weapon raised, and froze. Mira's cell was empty. She's gone, Jalen said, checking the other cells. Must have escaped in the chaos. Relief flooded through Rogers. Good girl, he muttered. He keyed his comm. All units, fall back to extraction point Alpha. As they raced through the corridors, alarms shrieked. A massive explosion rocked the fortress. Naya's pushing hard, Jalen yelled. We need to move. They rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Krath stood before them, his hulking frame overflowing with activated weaponry. Go, Rogers shouted to his team. I'll hold him off. Krath's mech suit whirred to life. Rogers dove aside as plasma bolts scorched the wall behind him. Your resistance ends here, human, Krath snarled. Rogers' mind raced, assessing his surroundings. His gaze fell on a warning sign. Caution, reactor access. He allowed himself a grim smile. Not today. Rogers sprinted toward the reactor chamber, Krath in pursuit. Emergency bulkheads began to seal, but Rogers slid beneath one, trapping Krath on the other side. Through a reinforced viewport, Rogers locked eyes with the alien hunter. He reached for the reactor controls. For Mira, he whispered. For humanity. Rogers's fingers flew across the panel. Warning klaxons blared as the reactor core destabilized. He turned to see Mira on the far side of the bulkhead, her eyes wide with horror. She pounded on the blast shield, screaming something he couldn't hear. Rogers pressed his hand against the barrier, a sad smile on his face. There was so much he wanted to say, but there was no time. The reactor reached critical mass. Rogers closed his eyes as white-hot energy engulfed him. Outside the fortress, Mira watched the devastating explosion from the rebel ship's viewport. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the magnitude of Rogers' sacrifice. As they soared into the atmosphere, leaving the burning fortress behind, Mira knew that nothing would ever be the same. The future Rogers had dreamed of now rested in her hands. She turned to the gathered rebels, her voice steady despite her grief. We have work to do.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.